What's going on, everybody? And welcome into the 124th episode of the CRZY podcast. As always, I'm your host, Stephen Gates, and this is the show where we talk about creativity, leadership, design, and a whole lot of other stuff that's meant to empower creative people. Now, remember, you can listen to all the shows, get the show notes, and a whole lot more. Just head over to thecrazy1.com. It's the words the crazy and the number 1.com. Also, make sure you hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform. And while you're there, remember to leave me a review. It's the only payment I ever ask for this show, and it means a ton and brings more listeners into the show. And also remember, the Crazy One is also on YouTube. I've got videos on there around career coaching, different application tutorials, masterclasses, past keynotes. That's just go to thecrazy1.com/YouTube. Now, this is the continuation of the three-part series we're doing on creating demand for design. And just as a reminder, I'm doing this series really because I think this is one of those topics that is complicated. It would be way too much, and we wouldn't do it justice to cram it into one episode, so we're breaking it into three. Now, in the last episode, we talked about how some people see design as more of a statement of ownership than a process. We talked about the difference between design and creativity, how that really equates to some people seeing what you do as an output and an outcome. Now, a lot of that was high level, but it was the foundation for this show and the next one. And it's critical to understand because everything we're going to talk about is going to be based in that. Now, in this episode, we're going to talk about, I think, how do you understand what do you need to do to be able to turn those high-level concepts into actual impact? If you want to go from being a commodity to a strategic asset, what's the mindset you need to have? What's the way you need to act and think about this? And then let's talk about some actual tangible things that you can do to start to set that up. Now, the thing here is going to be, these may not be the traditional things that you would think about, but the reason why we're going to talk about it is because a lot of, if you want to talk about the craft of design, the fit, the finish, how should we present it, how should you do a lot of that, that's not going to shift you into a strategic team. That's going to keep you on the commodity side. So that's what we want to talk about, is a lot of this is how do you, I think, create the demand and then start to put yourself in conversations and in places to start to show that the value that you bring is in your thinking, is in your approach, is in your ability to bring people together, to create collaboration and new ideas and to help facilitate that and to help people think in different ways. And I think that's the real value of design, is doing some of those sort of things. So I think that's really where we want to start, because at the end of the day, I've always really believed, look, design is not a department, right? It's a practice, it's a thinking, it's an approach to doing these sort of things. And so since it's that sort of approach, then we need to approach this problem differently. Yes, the craft matters, but what we need to do is we need to have a plan, right? We need to have an approach. And I think that I'm going to go through what I think are the three most popular things that I've done to be able to help create that demand. But the first thing we need to talk about is you need to create your plan, because the team that you're on, the organization that you're a part of, the clients that you have, are going to be different than the ones that I've had. So do these things work? Yes. But there's going to be a lot of nuance. There's going to be a lot of different things that go into this that you're going to need to figure out. So I want to start to talk about, how do you build a plan? And whenever we talk about a plan, I think this is one of the biggest things that so many leaders struggle with, is where do I start? What do I do? How do I make the change? And all that you need to start is a plan. And I coach so many people on the fact that a plan does not need to be the answer. A plan is an approach. A plan is a way of thinking. A plan is saying, hey, we're going to go figure this sort of stuff out. That's exactly what we do with all of our creative work, all the time. But somehow, whenever it comes to leading teams, whenever it comes to changing things, whenever it comes to doing those things, somehow we feel like we have to have it all worked out before we even start. And I think that's the first thing in all of this, is that what you want to do is to set out, what do you want to accomplish? What do you want to change? What do we want to do? And then include your team, include your partners, include other people in that approach to be able to make that change happen. That I think too many people get too wound up. And then, because the problem is, whenever you try to have all the answers, you are putting something out into your organization that is often hard to get people to come on side and be a part of. I think if you speak in outcomes, if you speak in problems, if you speak in things we can solve together, that's something that people feel like they can participate in and they can be a part of and they can help solve. Whenever you speak in answers, that often is asking for more of a reaction, sort of a black and white way to respond, as opposed to saying, hey, this is something I can be a part of. So as you think about what your problems are, as you think about the things you need to overcome, there's really four key things in any plan that I think you need for it to be able to be really effective. The first one is your plan needs to be informed, meaning it needs to be grounded in reality, in data, in insights, in real examples of what is working, of what isn't working, of, we're taking twice as much time as we should be. Our velocity is terrible. We're wasting time, right? Like, it needs to be solving real problems and not just say that, okay, we're just going to do this because it's cooler, because everybody else is doing it, or because it's going to look better, right? These are not reasons that other teams are going to get behind. There needs to be something of actual substance, of actual examples. This is why my approach is whenever I go into a new team, to a new organization, I spend pretty much the first 30 to 45 days with my mouth mostly shut. I want to do one-on-ones. I want to do start-stop continues. I want to do 360s. I want to gather that data. I want to gather those insights. I want to get real examples of, even if it's something that I know that needs to change on day one, I want to give myself the time to make sure that what I'm seeing is true and I'm not jumping at a shadow. But I also want to build the relationships, to get the data, to get the insights, to do those sort of things so that I'm sure that what I'm saying is grounded in something real. Because if I say it on day one, hey, we need to change this, everybody's reaction is, well, what the hell does he know? What the hell, why are we need to change that? If I've taken the time to talk to them, to listen to them, to understand what the pain points are, if I've gone through and I have multiple examples of where this is happening and how it's hurt projects, that's seen and heard vastly differently. And it's only 2 to 4 weeks later. So we're not talking about a huge amount of time. But I think the second thing it needs to be is it needs to be clear, right? People need to understand what needs to change. And very importantly, they need to understand what is their role in it. Because in many cases, we just say, things need to be different. Be specific. Pick specific things, whether it's the way that your team is involved, how early you're involved. Again, that fact that you want to get more problems and not just solutions, right? Be clear. And then talk to your team so they understand what their role is in the change. What are you asking and expecting them to do? Do the same with your partners and leadership and everything else. Be clear. This is another reason why whenever I come to an organization, I say I'm going to take 30 to 45 days to do this, because I want to be clear. Because if I don't define that, if I'm not clear on what that process is, people are either going, well, one, what the hell is he doing? Or two, if I'm not clear that that's what it is I'm doing, a lot of organizations will then rush in and try to define that for you. They're going to try to define your role, tell you what it is you should be doing. Do a lot of these sort of things that are then going to screw up my plans, my process. And that's going to happen because I haven't been clear around what that is. I think the other part of this then is that your plan needs to be inclusive. And this sort of goes and links with the last one. But by inclusive, what I mean is that everyone needs to be empowered to be a part of the change. This has been a constant theme in this show over the years. And the reason why it's a constant theme is the reason why 75% of this sort of transformation, this change fails, is because the team and the people who are doing the work are not empowered to be a part of it. They are spectators to it. They're the recipients of presentations, but they are not actually empowered to do anything. And so as a result of that, they listen, they nod, they don't participate, the organization does not change, and you're right back where you started. And I think a lot of this goes to the last part, because I think a lot of it for me is I want to make sure that any plan I have is human. I want to make sure that everyone feels valued. And that if there are personnel changes, if there are ways we have to reorg, if there are things we want to do, that those people are involved in those decisions, that they're being told what the standards are, given an opportunity to rise to them, to be able to do it in as human and probably humane way as possible. Because I think that it is really important that people are a part of this change. That is often one of the hallmarks of high-performing teams, is that these are people that believe in the mission. These are people that believe in what is actually happening and take an active part in it. They feel like they don't want to screw it up. They feel like there's a lot of those sort of things, as opposed to the people that come in and just sort of go through the motions because it's what somebody told them to. So I think making sure that people feel valued, that you're taking the time to listen to them, to make sure that whenever you're putting this plan together, it's responding to what it is you're hearing. These are all really important things. But those are sort of the tone, the things to think about, that as your plan comes together, make sure and go back and use that sort of as the yardstick to be able to make sure that whatever it is you're thinking adheres to those 4 things. Now, as we talk about how do you create demand, by demand, what I mean is, how do people want to work with your team? How do they want to work with your team sooner? How do they want you to be more involved in things? How do they want you to be the ones that whenever there's a really tough problem, you're the ones they need in the room? Because I think a lot of that is what so many of us crave. I think that's what so many of us have been searching for through the Great Resignation, through a lot of these changes. We've been searching for that respect, for that power, for that moment and that opportunity to say, I want to be more than just a pixel pusher. And so there's 3 things that I turn to fairly regularly. The first one, not surprisingly, I think if you listen to the show for any amount of time, is to use a design methodology. This is design thinking. This is a design sprint. This is sort of whatever flavor of that you want. But this is, you need a way to work that does a couple really important things. It needs to be data informed. It needs to be human centered. And it needs to be a way that is inclusive of your partners and is a way where you and your team can get consistent results. Because a lot of the design process, a lot of the way we work, or a lot of what we are shut out of is often a process that does not do these things. And the reason why I turn to this, the reason why I like it, is because it does all of those things. Now, as I said in the last episode, one of the things I never do is call it design thinking. Because as soon as you call it design thinking, then all of a sudden everybody thinks it's a design thing, and we're back into that ownership issue we talked about in the first episode. But it does a couple things that I think will help really change some of the problems you're up against. The first one is I think it creates teamwork, it creates empathy, and it creates perspective. It creates teamwork in that I always really like this approach because I want, when I'm working in digital, I want product, I want engineering, I want executives, I want QA and legal and compliance and everybody else to be a part of the process. I want to be able to work with stakeholders who have opinions. But what I want is a methodology that can take all of those things, strip away the titles, strip away the department, put it on equal footing, and then do the second thing, which is then create empathy and actually put it in front of your customers. Let them be the source of truth. Get rid of the internal arguments, the internal politics, a lot of the back and forth, and say, look, we're going to take all these ideas. We think they are all equally valid. We're going to quickly prototype them. We're going to put them in front of our consumers, and they're going to decide what works. So all the politics, all the back and forth, all the who's right, all those sort of things goes away. Now, let's pause there for 1 second, because I do think for a lot of teams, you're not in a place where that sort of nirvana is going to be able to happen right away. Because a lot of the teams that I work with, what they struggle with is that they're being told what to do. They're launching work that isn't working. It's being caught too late. That design, candidly, is probably where the rest of the organization's bullshit comes to get settled. If product teams disagree, if there's a disagreement in strategy, right? It's like that, well, let's just put it in the design and then we'll figure it out there, which never works. And so I think that the other thing you need to look at is how you are running this process. Because particularly if you're running Agile, what I see is too many teams who are trying to run design thinking in their Agile sprints. And you cannot do concepting work in an Agile sprint. It just doesn't work. I've tried it on teams. I've tried it other places. I've tried to find teams that do it. I cannot find ones that do it successfully. Because you need to be able to find time to do the conceptual work, to do the thinking, to figure out the direction that you then take into the sprints and go build. Because if you're trying to do the conceptual work in your sprints, you usually completely screw up your backlog. You're taking way longer than you should because you're trying to figure out problems while you're doing it. So I think the one thing I would advocate is that if you're in that situation, run what I'll call a sprint 0, which is take the requirements and do a validation sprint. Make sure the problem is real. Build a prototype to validate it. Understand what the direction is. Usually your engineering partners also would love a sprint 0 because what they would love is the ability to look at what services do they need to build things that need to happen, not just take what's on the shelf whenever somebody throws a solution at them. So I think making sure that you are creating that perspective is really important. Because if not, you tend to run to the first idea. You tend to go to the first thing that somebody says. You don't validate, whether this is a real problem or not. That it is very easy to get data and create an echo chamber that there's a problem there, and it's only whenever you build a product that you find out that it's not. But I think to be able to take the time to run that, to be able to understand, is this problem real, will save you so much more time down the line. But that's the other thing, and that's why I like this approach, is because it asks you, if not always, hopefully demands you, to look at a problem from multiple angles. But I think that's so much of this, right, is that it stops that opinion battle. It stops that back and forth. It grounds it in all of these things, which is often why I think so many companies don't necessarily realize that creativity and corporate structure rarely coexist. And this is why. Is because a lot of this is around opinion battles and who's right, and we're not just looking at the best idea wins, and that's what goes forward. All the companies everybody loves, Apple, Nike, that's the way they work, so why shouldn't we do it too? But I think the other thing about a design methodology that I really like is it's empowering, because it's not saying that the design team is in charge, right? What it's saying is that design, product, engineering, executives, different groups lead in different parts of the process. But what it allows us to do is to help facilitate that process, facilitate the brainstorms, to be, again, seen as for more than just our execution, to get some of the power in that facilitation, to be able to be a part of these sort of things and help lead a discussion, not be the recipient of a discussion. And so I think all of these things are why I keep going back to things like design methodologies, because I think beyond just the way of working and the sticky notes and all that stuff, it just does some things psychologically, structurally, process-wise, that really put us in a lot better place. Now, the other key to this is, and I think this is where we have to stick to this, is that whenever you do it, though, don't skip any steps, right? Don't just use the easy part of the methodology, because I see too many teams do this, where it's like, look, you need to do the facts. The facts need to inform the insights. The insights need to lead you to multiple different how might we's that lead into brainstorms, that lead into prototypes, right? Like, that needs to be the flow. Now, I can do a different show around, again, you can scale that up or down, but that's really what it needs to do. But again, this also should not be, design thinking is not a process that we should run in a vacuum. It doesn't work nearly as well when it's just done alone. It needs to coexist with product and engineering, operations, executives, bring everybody into the party. Because that's what it's so good at, is it lets you be able to bring them into the party, but it lets you still keep control over the process. Now, the other part of this, and this goes to a little bit about what I talked about with that Sprint Zero, is that so many times, one of the other biggest challenges I see around why we can't demonstrate the value of design is because in many cases, the value is just seen as just the output. That, the problems are unclear. We're given bad problems to solve. We're given solutions that don't make any sense. And that the other thing I see time and time again in so many organizations is if you back that problem up, say, where is that coming from? Why does that happen? Why are we constantly the recipient of so much of this? Some of it's insecurity, right? Leaders who don't like to just be able to go through the process unsure of what the answer is. They have that, candidly, sort of antiquated view of leadership, that leadership is you're in charge and you give your team the answers. Not you give them a problem and potentially give them insights and then work with them to be able to figure out what that is. But in many cases, if you step even further back and look at the organization, rarely, if ever, do I find a single source of truth that everyone is working from. That is there a real understanding of what is the journey of our customers? Where is the real data that is fair, that is balanced, that there's a lot of these sort of things, and isn't always just a hunch, where we actually have something that we all can refer to. Because too many times there is multiple roadmaps and every department has their own roadmap and their own goals and they're all going in different directions. And then as a result, like I said, a lot of that trickles down, a lot of that dysfunction trickles down and lands in design. So one of the biggest things that I'll often do whenever I come in, and this is usually not something that people will think about as the function of design, but one of the things I want to do is I want to work with my partners to create that single source of truth. Maybe it's an image, maybe it's a document, maybe it's a concept, but it's something that aligns everyone on what the problem is to be solved. Because that's the thing, is for so many of us, we're caught in this trap where we just tend to think and innovate as far as the project in front of us. We often blindly accept that this is what it is we need to do, And that a lot of this really is, with this single source of truth approach, is to get the organization to understand that, again, design is not a department. Product, engineering, executives, you're all making design decisions. Are you sketching and doing those sort of things? Is it design in that sense? No. But whenever you're making decisions about customer experience, what we're going to work on, whenever you're looking at how a tech stack comes together, how something's going to be rendered, these all influence the experience in all sorts of different ways, but these are all ending up being design decisions. And this is where, as designers, we get in trouble too many times, because then we are the recipient of all those decisions. And then what happens is that we give them shape, we give them form and function, and then we put them out there, and then everybody goes, well, that's a bad idea, and somehow they blame us for a lot of things that have nothing to do with us. So for me, if we're the recipients of those decisions, then I think in many cases we need to step up and step out to more actively participate in what is happening upstream to get a better control around these things. So, because for me, look, I don't think you can build demand if everyone isn't clear on what the problem is that needs to be solved. And, there's generally two ways that I've approached this. One is that I am actually a huge believer in doing customer journey mapping. And that this is a journey map that is from, again, the first consideration point through purchase, through retention, through sort of whatever it is your business is, whatever that model looks like. But it is a map that is based in real data and is really about the current state of your experience. Because I find almost every single time, whenever I've done this with teams that I've been on, whenever I've done it with other teams, you have a sense of what the problem is, but nobody's really sure where it is, what it's coming from, what's it going to take to solve it. People aren't aligned on what the problems are. And that this allows you to be able to put, and again, based in data, this is often why I have third parties do this work, is because I need everybody to look at this and say, this is where our problems are. This is where we need to invest. This is how we need to do the prioritization. Because often change usually also has an order of operations. That to get to this big idea, certain fundamental foundational things need to happen before that big idea can be possible. So this allows you to map that out, to understand where we are, where do we need to go, where are the blockers. That, look, a lot of the times don't assume your executives understand the state of your tech stack, your customer experience, or your POS, or sort of whatever it is. Because also, nobody's going to stand up at a meeting and say, I don't understand this stuff. They're going to nod and smile and go, oh, I get it. And I think, that ability to show them that really can make a difference. Now, the other thing that I do a lot is I'll create what I'll call these North Star concepts. We've talked about these before, but this is really, how do I see the future, and then work back from there. And what I want to be able to do is to try to create the state of where do we want to end up in 18 to 24 months. Because usually anything past that is science fiction, anything closer than that is usually just incremental change. But what I want to be able to do is say, look, here's this experience we could have, isn't this great? And everybody goes, ooh and ah. But then what I want to be able to do is to take that 18 to 24 month vision and say, great, now how do I break that back to where are we at in a year, where are we at in 8 months, 6 months, 3 months, 1 week tomorrow? And I want to do that with product, I want to do that with engineering, because if these are really big changes, then I need to work with product, because I need them to be able to figure out what are smaller, lightweight initiatives that can keep the business moving and give us the cover fire until these bigger things can launch. I want to be able to work with engineering, because if they need to get certain technologies or certain things in place, I need to understand how long is that going to take, so that then I can design the experience around that so that those things will kick in at a certain point. But it isn't just that sort of like big science fiction, because the other thing that it does that I think is really, really important is that it creates consequence. Because in a lot of companies, and a lot of teams, will make these sort of short-term decisions of, oh, we should do this, oh, we should do that, let's do this smaller thing. And we lose sight of the bigger picture. We lose sight of where it is we're going. And so that as a result, we get very caught up in these little incremental changes and these little things, and there's no consequence to it. We don't say, look, we're missing out on the bigger leap forward. We're missing out on the bigger innovation, and we're getting stuck in a lot of these smaller things. And this is what that vision does, is it let you say, okay, look, if we're going to get distracted, if we're going to get ADD, and we're going to go focus on all this other stuff, then this big thing that you want, this big thing that's going to make us all this money, that's going to do all these things, it gets delayed, it gets diluted, it gets put off, or it gets stopped. And then it's like, oh, right? So there's a consequence and a guidepost to be able to measure it against and say, is it worth it? Because look, if you have a good prioritization process where you're going through and you're able to measure that sort of impact, that's great. Not a ton of companies do. But I think those two approaches to having some sort of a single source of truth, something to focus on, I think, again, that allows you to be in a place to be able to show off your thinking, to be able to put that idea out there, to participate much more early on, to be able to be seen in a more strategic conversation around creating that customer journey map, creating that North Star concept, right? You're showing off your thinking, and that's what matters. So I think getting to that single source of truth not only helps you get the problems you need, get the right problems you need, but it allows you to be able to create conversations and assets that, again, get you seen as a much more strategic partner and not just about the people that make it pretty. Now, the last part of this is that we have to acknowledge that this is change that we're trying to do with people. And so for me, a lot of this then is that we need to acknowledge that whenever we're trying to do this change, and if we know that most of this sort of transformation work, most of this repositioning work fails because people don't feel empowered, that we know that people don't want to be a part of this change, then what we know is that the last part of this has to then really look at mindset. And that what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to look at issues of trust, transparency, honesty, right? Here again, these are all concepts that we've looked at before. I've done whole episodes on the explaining, why is trust really important? We've done whole episodes looking at, why are honesty and this sort of transparency really important? So if those are shows you have not listened to, please go back into the catalog to be able to get to those shows because this is going to be really important. But I think the biggest thing that we need to recognize is that often, how do we deal with problems? What is the sort of mindset that we are building? And one of the things that I see most often is that for a lot of teams, they address their problems retroactively and reactively. Meaning that we'll go through and we do a whole bunch of work, and then whenever it's over, we look back and say, hey, what could we have done differently? Well, I understand that, but we also understand that that means the work has been done, that we've actually gone through. And again, we're just looking at process. Very rarely in retros are we dealing with the actual behaviors, the interactions, the bigger things than just sort of like, hey, next time let's have this meeting sooner, or let's put another line into this report, right? Rarely is that dealing with mentality, trust, these sort of emotional issues. And I think that, the other part where we'll tend to deal with that is reactively, generally meaning something's on fire, that something has gone really, really wrong, that we need to be able to fix that. So let's all jump in and do something differently. I think that this, again, wherever I come back to, that I think we need to start investing in cultural innovation, emotional innovation, process innovation, at the same level that we really invest in product innovation. And that for a lot of this, we really need to look at how are we defining the mentality for the work we're about to do and empower the team to do that. Now, again, I've talked about this for years in my talks. I've talked about it on this show. The quick recap is what we need to be able to do are have very clearly defined behaviors that define how do we and our partners show up for each other. This isn't just the process. These are the things where we actually value trust, where we value mindset and mentality and approach and empathy, and a lot of the things that really define high-performing, great teams. And that oftentimes the behaviors are really things that should address what are the long-standing, consistent problems that your team has, that you have with other teams, that your company has, the things that time and time again short-circuit the process, shut us down. Maybe that's collaboration issues. Maybe it's, again, the internal opinion wars. Maybe any of these sort of things, right? Where we just say, hey, we accept mediocrity too easily. And then what we want to be able to do is to go through and define what are the behaviors that we want to be able to start to take these on. And the reason why this is important is that the problems are usually everybody knows about. The behaviors are, again, generally they're not rocket science. There are things like make sure you invite all your partners to key meetings and include them in brainstorms to be able to have your customers as your source of truth, right? Like generally these aren't like, revolutionary concepts. But the part where apparently it does get revolutionary is whenever you actually go through and write them down and you put them up on walls and you put them on cards and you talk about them in meetings and you start meetings with them and you do these sort of things where they're actually defined and enforced and talked about and embraced. Those are the things that seem to make it revolutionary because these are simple concepts and all things that we know. But what happens is whenever you write them down, whenever you talk about them, again, start your meetings with mission statements, put the behaviors on cards. And when somebody does it, hold it up and celebrate them. Because the other thing that you need to realize is if you want to be able to change this stuff, the best way to be able to do it is to model the behavior you want, not criticize the behavior you don't. And too many of us fall into that negativity bias. Whenever we talked about a lot of these sort of different confirmation biases and these sort of things, negativity bias is a real one, which means we tend to like bad news better. We tend to like to be able to focus on that sort of stuff. Hope is more work. Change is more work. It's easier to criticize than to model what we want. But that's what behaviors do. They allow us to model the behaviors we want, the mentality we need to be able to empower the team to be a part of that. And that's what we need if we really want to be able to do change. And here's the hard part with all of this, is that to be able to create this demand isn't going to be easy. Because the reality is that I think for a lot of us, we always like, look, design is important. We know that the impact this can have. Everybody will say how, yes, we need more of that. But the hard truth is, generally, people don't care about problems that don't affect them. And that the other teams have other problems and other things that they're focused on, and they aren't really concerned about ours. So I think that's why I like this approach of being able to create things like a design methodology, a single source of truth, a shared mindset. All of these are collaborative. All of these bring people together. All of them bring us all into the same space, because the other thing I've found is that a lot of the teams, maybe their problem doesn't look exactly like mine, but it looks really damn close. And that our ability to bond together, our ability to work on this together, our ability to invest in each other makes everything better. That we can deal with their frustration and our frustration and a lot of other things. But it does require us to be the ones who also open up our design process to let these people in, because I think sometimes we create our own monsters. We still sort of want to go back to that day of being the artist wearing the beret off in the water, off in the corner doing a watercolor of a spirit animal or something and telling everybody how they don't understand our process. Those days are gone. And I think, we need to be open and inclusive about what this is. But again, this is why we need methodologies and single sources of truth and data and all these sort of things, so that, again, we can keep some control over this process and that we can level the playing field and be able to do these sort of things so that, again, we just let the ideas win. And in many cases, we also have to get over that, because in too many cases, we get a little too in love with our work. We get a little bit too infatuated with what it is and how great we think our thinking is. But I think that these are long-standing problems. And I think that as a result, this is not stuff that's going to just sort of happen overnight. It's going to take time. And so, again, my advice is do a pilot. Find teams that also have this problem, that want to be able to try something different with you. Go start and look at the piece of work that nobody cares about. That's probably one of my biggest tricks in getting this stuff to work, is because whenever you do that, you generally end up with teams who really love the attention. They're very willing to try things differently. You're able to get in there, try it, pilot it, show the results, show that what your impact is, show that whenever you get a seat at the table, what it is you can do, and then go out and talk about it. And that's what we're going to do in the next episode. Is we're going to talk about how do we then actually demonstrate. Now that we've gone through and we understand where we need to be, whenever we've talked about what are some of these things we can do to create demand, to engage in conversations differently, to move us into more of that asset and out of that commodity category. As that starts to happen, the last piece, and why it's the last show, is also a lot of us really suck at telling that story. We feel like it's egotistical. We feel like it's stuff that people should know. We feel like, again, we're doing presentations all the time. How do they not see it? That's what we're going to talk about in the episode 125 and the third and final part of this series, is then how do you actually demonstrate the value of design? And again, I think that's what I said, is for too many people, they think the value of design is like, I just need to present my work differently. No, right? That's what we've been talking about all along. You need to base your value in your thinking, in your creativity, in your ability to change the company and change your customer. To do that, that's the value. But it means thinking about your value differently, approaching how you do it differently, engaging in these conversations and these partnerships differently. Because then when you do all of that, then there is real value beyond the visual that you can be able to show people to really get them on their side for this. So that's what we're going to talk about next. So stay tuned for episode 125, and we're going to get to the last part around that. But as we go through with this, remember, you can get all the show notes and you can listen to all the shows. Just once again, head over to thecrazy1.com. And again, last time, remember, please leave me a review. Always makes a really big difference. You can also, remember, you can follow me on social media. You can add there. I put out new content. I'm putting out articles. You can ask questions. You can follow me on Instagram or Twitter. You can follow the show on LinkedIn or Facebook. As always, everybody down in legal wants me to remind you, the views here are just my own. They don't represent any of my past employers. And finally, I say it every time because I mean it every time, but thank you for your time. I know that time is truly the only real luxury of any of us have. I'm always incredibly humbled. You want to spend any of it listening to me. So go out there. Think about this stuff. Think about where are you on that commodity versus asset category? What are the things that you need to do differently? How do you go out and, again, bring your partners into your process? Engage in what that problem is. Think about what is the mindset and how can you help shift that. I think this is the real power of creativity, is how we're able to be able to create this change and remind people that everybody's creative and design isn't just a department. And above all, with all of that, stay crazy.